The town of Millersfield always looked ordinary on the surface. Quaint houses with porches lined the streets. The corner store smelled of pumpkin spice every October. And kids rode bikes down Main Street without a care in the world. But if you asked anyone who had grown up there, they'd tell you the same thing. Halloween night was different. It wasn't just the decorations, though the townsfolk went all out with skeletons on roofs and glowing jack-o'-lanterns that lined the sidewalks. It was something about the air itself thicker, colder, charged with a kind of anticipation that felt like both a trick and a treat. Everyone in Millersfield knew the stories. Shadows that moved when you weren't looking, whispers that carried on the wind, and the legend of Hollow House, the mansion on the hill that nobody dared to visit after dark. Well, nobody except us. There were 5 of us that year: me, Sarah, my best friend since kindergarten, twins Jake and Julie, and Marcus, the new kid in town. We were all 16, old enough to scoff at ghost stories, but young enough to want to prove ourselves. It started as a dare, of course. It always does. "You're all scared," Jake said, grinning around a mouthful of candy corn. We were sitting on the steps of Sarah's porch, watching the trick-or-treaters swarm the neighborhood. Nobody's got the guts to spend an hour in Hollow House. Julie rolled her eyes. Nobody has the desire either. That place smells like raccoon pee and regret. But Marcus, eager to fit in, leaned forward. "What's Hollow House?" That was all it took. The twins launched into the story, voices overlapping, weaving a tale of a house built 100 years ago by Silas Hollow, a reclusive man who had supposedly dabbled in dark sciences. He vanished one Halloween night, and ever since, the house had been abandoned except for the flickering lights that locals swore they'd seen in the windows and the strange laughter that sometimes drifted down the hill. Legend says if you spend the night there, Sarah added dramatically, you either go mad or you don't come back at all. Or you just get a tetanus shot, I muttered, but of course the idea was already locked in. By 10 o'clock, the streets had thinned. Pumpkins glowed softly in the dark, and the last of the candy seekers had gone home. That was when we made our move. Armed with flashlights, too much sugar in our systems, and a bravado none of us really felt, we trudged up the hill toward Hollow House. The place loomed like something out of a movie, tall, crooked, its windows like empty eyes. The front gate screeched when we pushed it open, and Marcus whispered, "That's welcoming." Inside, the air was colder, stale with dust and something faintly metallic. Every step echoed too loudly, as though the house itself were listening. My flashlight beam danced across torn wallpaper, shattered mirrors, and once grand chandeliers now webbed in cobwebs. "This is fine," Jake said too loudly. "Totally fine. Not creepy at all." Julie elbowed him. "You sound like you're trying to convince yourself." We split up, sort of. Nobody wanted to be alone, but curiosity tugged us in different directions. Sarah and I headed toward what looked like a study, while the twins and Marcus explored the staircase. The study smelled of old paper and mold. Books lay scattered on the floor, their pages yellow and brittle. On the desk sat a dusty journal with S.H. carved into the leather cover. I brushed it off and flipped it open. The handwriting was cramped, full of strange symbols and notes about conduits and shadows. "Creepy scientist guy vibes," Sarah whispered. She leaned closer, and that's when we both froze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, upstairs. We weren't alone. Our first thought was that it was the others, but then we heard them 2 shouts echoing from the stairwell. "Was that you?" Jake's voice, high-pitched. "Don't mess around." Sarah grabbed my arm. "Okay, we're leaving." But the house had other plans. The front door, the one we'd left slightly open, was now shut tight. Marcus yanked at the handle, swore, and yanked again. Nothing. Julie kicked it. It didn't budge. The air seemed heavier suddenly, as though pressing against us. And then came the laugh. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was almost soft, like a chuckle carried on the wind. But it came from everywhere at once, sliding down the walls and crawling under our skin. Jake dropped his flashlight. It clattered to the floor and rolled, the beam spinning wildly. Nope. 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 Not doing this. We all pressed together in the foyer, every nerve on edge. The laugh faded, but then the lights began, candles flaring to life in the hall, one by one, though none of us had touched them. Okay, that's impossible, Marcus whispered. And yet, there they were, a glowing trail leading deeper into the house. Now, if this were a horror movie, this would be the part where the audience screams, "Don't go in there." But we weren't in a theater. We were in a haunted house, half terrified, half exhilarated, and fully stupid. So, of course, we followed. The trail led us to the dining room. A long table stretched across the room, covered in a dusty cloth. But beneath the dust, something shimmered faintly: silverware, plates, even goblets, as though a feast had been laid out long ago and frozen in time. And then, right before our eyes, the dust lifted. It didn't vanish all at once. It swirled, as though brushed away by invisible hands, revealing roasted meats, glistening fruit, cakes stacked high, and golden candlesticks. A banquet, lavish and impossible, as though we had stepped into another century. I heard Sarah whisper, "This can't be real." But then the goblets filled themselves with red wine or something that looked like it, and the chairs scraped back as though inviting us to sit. None of us moved. Not until Jake, ever the reckless one, said, "Well, I'm starving." "Don't you dare," Julie hissed. But he reached out anyway, grabbing a piece of bread. The moment his fingers touched it, the whole feast evaporated: food, plates, goblets, all dissolving into dust that rained down onto the table. And then the laughter came again, louder this time, closer. We bolted. No one needed to say it. Chairs toppled as we ran, flashlights swinging wildly. The house groaned around us, floorboards creaking, doors slamming shut on their own. We scrambled through hallways, hearts pounding, until at last we found ourselves in the grand parlor. And there he was, or at least something. A figure stood by the fireplace, tall and thin, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. His face was pale, almost skeletal, and his eyes glowed faintly in the dark. He tilted his head, studying us like we were the strangest thing had ever seen. "Visitors," he said, his voice echoing in a way no human voice should. How delightful. None of us spoke. None of us breathed. The figure chuckled, that same laugh we'd heard before, and stepped forward. But instead of lunging or cackling like a villain in a story, he simply sighed. "Every year," he said, "always the same. Children come to mock the house, to play games, always expecting monsters." His glowing eyes softened. "I was a man once, Silas Hollow. I only sought to understand what lies beyond. But I became bound. Bound." The word hung heavy. "I cannot leave," he said simply. "And so I play my part. The haunted mansion. The frightening tale. Perhaps it is all I deserve." For a moment, none of us knew what to do. Then Sarah, of all people, stepped forward. "You don't have to scare people," she said softly. "You could, I don't know, tell your story. Be the town legend. A friendly one." Silas tilted his head, as though considering it. "Friendly?" The word sounded foreign on his tongue. Jake, ever the opportunist, added, "Yeah, you'd be way cooler as, like, the local ghost tour guy. People would love it." There was a pause. Then for the first time the figure smiled. Not a cruel smile, but something wistful. "Perhaps," he murmured. The candles flickered, and then, just as suddenly as had appeared, Silas was gone. The parlor was empty again, the fire cold. The front door creaked open. We didn't waste a second. We sprinted out, down the hill, and didn't stop until Sarah's porch was in sight. Only then did we collapse, gasping, laughing, half terrified, half thrilled. Marcus, still wide-eyed, said, "Did that actually happen?" Nobody answered, but we all knew the truth. The next morning, word spread through town. People claimed they'd seen lights dancing in the windows of Hollow House, not eerie this time, but bright, almost welcoming. Someone swore they heard music drifting down the hill, like a faint piano tune. And for the first time in decades, Kids talked about Hollow House not with dread, but with curiosity. As for us, we didn't tell the whole story. Some things, we figured, were better left as mystery. But every Halloween after, when the air grew thick and the pumpkins glowed, we'd glance up at the mansion on the hill. And if we listened closely, we could still hear it, the sound of laughter. Softer now, warmer, not a curse, not a warning, a greeting.